17 years later, they would call him the Lost Heir. But back then, he sat on the cold steps at the entrance to a Chicago subway station and asked for bread. And the only person who looked into his eyes every single day was a girl in an expensive school uniform. Chicago, North Shore, autumn. Eva was 12. She lived in a neighborhood where houses stood behind tall wrought iron gates and schools resembled universities. Their private school was only a 10-minute walk from home. Her mother insisted on it. She believed a child should walk on real ground, not live inside a glass capsule. Every day after classes, her mother met her at the gates. They walked the same route, and at the same corner by the subway entrance, he sat. A boy, too thin for his age, too quiet, too serious. A plastic cup stood in front of him. "For bread," he would say softly, without hysteria, without pressure, as if he were simply telling the truth. A year passed. Then another. He grew. She grew. Her coats changed with the seasons. His jacket remained the same. Sometimes it snowed. Sometimes it rained. Sometimes the wind tore the leaves from the trees. He was always there. One day, Eva lingered longer than usual. "What's your name?" He was silent for a long time. "If you don't want to say, you don't have to," she added. A pause. "Adrian." The name sounded calm. "I'm Eva." He nodded. "You always give coins," he said. "Because you're always here." He looked at her carefully. "I won't always be." It wasn't said like hope. It was said like a fact. That day, Eva didn't give him a coin. She ran to the bakery around the corner and came back with a paper bag. "This is better than loose change," she said. He took the bread carefully. "You don't have to." "I want to." He almost smiled. Almost. A week later, he was gone. 2 weeks, still gone. A month. The steps were empty. Too empty. "Mom, where did he go?" Her mother sighed. "Sometimes children are taken away by circumstances." But Eva felt it. This wasn't random. He hadn't simply left. He disappeared as if someone had torn him out of that place. First meeting. 15 years later. Chicago had changed. Eva was 27. It was her first day at Hale Industries, one of the largest corporations in the city. The glass tower reflected the pale autumn sky. The lobby was flawless, cold, perfect. She was nervous. The elevator carried her to the 34th floor. The doors opened. A discussion was already underway in the conference room. A low male voice. "We are not signing the agreement under these terms." Calm, firm, controlled. She stepped inside. He was standing by the panoramic window. Dark suit, sharp shoulders, focused posture. The city stretched behind him. When he turned, their eyes met. And something inside Eva tightened. The eyes. The same, but now there was steel in them. "You're new?" he asked. "Yes, Eva Morgan." Her name lingered in the air. Adrian Hale, Deputy CEO. Hale. The surname sounded heavier than it should have. She didn't know why. Later that evening, in the glass corridor outside the conference rooms, Eva slowed her steps. 2 employees stood near the window, speaking quietly. "He'll announce the engagement in 3 months. With the owner's daughter. It's part of the merger strategy." Their voices were low, casual, almost indifferent. Eva did not mean to listen, but she heard every word. 3 months. engagement, merger. The words settled somewhere deep inside her chest. She had no right to feel anything. She had just met him. She did not even know him, and yet something in her tightened. She kept her posture straight, did not turn, did not react. Only her fingers pressed slightly into the folder she was holding. Corporate decisions, strategic alliances, political marriages. That was the world he belonged to, and she suddenly understood. She was standing far outside of it. That same evening, on the other side of the city, an older couple sat in the library of their lakefront mansion. The room was warm. Bookshelves climbed the dark wooden walls. A fire burned quietly in the fireplace. On the desk lay a copy of Forbes. On the cover, a young executive, Adrian Hale. The woman leaned closer. "That's him," she whispered. Her husband did not answer immediately. He adjusted the magazine toward the light. Neck, just below the collarbone, a thin scar. 17 years ago, their 3-year-old son had fallen down the staircase. The stitches had left a mark impossible to mistake. Their child had been kidnapped that same year. For 17 years, they had searched. They had kept his DNA in every possible database, federal, private, international. They had never closed the case. "Find him," the father said quietly. A private investigator received the call that night. At the same time, Hale Industries had launched an expanded executive medical program. He did not remember faces. He remembered hands, rough, smelling of tobacco and cold, and a voice. "Do not dare say your name." He was still speaking then. He was 3, then 4. Then he stopped. He was taken in the evening. The house was large. The stairs were tall. The windows were bright. He remembered being carried, remembered the smell of fabric, remembered trying to scream. Then there was darkness. During the first year, he called himself by his real name. For that, he was beaten. "You are no one. You have no family. You should be grateful that you are fed." He sat at different entrances, different stations, different cities, but always on the steps. They explained the rules to him. Do not look people in the eyes. Do not run. Do not say anything unnecessary. Ask, quietly, without hysteria. That way, people give more. He understood one thing quickly. Pity is a tool. But something inside him resisted. He did not cry. He watched. He memorized. He counted steps, time, faces. He was not the loudest child. He was the most observant. One day he was moved to Chicago, the North Shore, a district where children wore expensive coats, where parents spoke with confidence, where the smell of coffee cost more than his life. He was 12, and there, for the first time, he saw her, a girl in a school uniform, light hair, a focused gaze. She did not throw coins. She stepped closer, and she looked at him, not from above, directly. For the first time, he felt something strange, not pity, not shame, but presence. When their fingers touched, he remembered the warmth. When she brought bread instead of coins, he remembered her voice. "I want to." He remembered her name, Eva. It was the first name he did not try to forget. A few months later, everything changed. They were moved at night, without explanation. One of the older boys tried to escape. They found him, and after that, talk of escape ended, but not for him. He built the plan slowly. He listened. He knew who drank, who was careless, who forgot to lock the back door. He was 15 when he tried for the first time. They caught him. The second time, he was 16. He did not run blindly. He disappeared gradually, changed direction, switched subway lines, blended into the crowd. And one day, he did not return. They found him 3 days later. The police. He gave them a different name. The documents were fake. He was sent to an orphanage. He did not tell the truth. He did not know whom to tell it to. His real name still sat somewhere deep inside him, like a word forbidden to speak. By 25, he was already working in consulting. By 27, in a major corporation. By 30, they called him a strategy genius. Adrian Hale. The name sounded clean, confident, as if it had belonged to him since birth. He accepted it. He built it. He became it. He no longer asked. He signed. He no longer waited for coins. He controlled budgets. He no longer sat on steps. He stood by panoramic windows. But sometimes, when someone in the boardroom looked at him too closely, something tightened inside, as if a part of him was still waiting for someone to say, "That is not your name." He did not know who he truly was, and he did not know that very soon the past he had so carefully buried would find him first. Adrian Hale was never late, not to meetings, not to decisions, not to deals. At 30, he was already standing where others arrived at 40. Deputy CEO of Hale Industries, a man they called a cold strategist, a man who never hesitated. He did not believe in luck. He believed in calculation. That was why Richard Morgan trusted him more than anyone. The board of directors had gathered early. The agenda? A merger. Risks, shares, expansion to the west. Adrian spoke calmly, without unnecessary emotion. When he finished a sentence, the room went silent. He controlled attention the same way he controlled budgets. After the meeting, Richard stopped him. "You understand that the next step will be formalizing the alliance." Adrian looked at him directly. "Yes." "To Charlotte is ready." "Ready." The word sounded like a signature on a contract. Charlotte Morgan, the CEO's daughter, impeccable, raised for decisions like this. She had long considered Adrian her future. The board considered the marriage ideal, investors strategic. "It will strengthen our position," Richard added calmly. Adrian nodded. He understood the numbers, he understood the structure, he understood the benefit. But inside, nothing moved. No joy, no resistance, emptiness. "I'll give you an answer," he said. Richard narrowed his eyes. Adrian never gave answers later. He decided immediately. Charlotte entered his office without knocking. The city lights flickered behind her like a silent audience. She didn't hesitate. She never did. "You understand this is the right move," she said softly. Her voice was calm, measured, already certain of the outcome. Adrian remained by the window. "It's logical," she continued. "It's secure." Secure. The words settled in the room like a signed contract. Charlotte Morgan, flawless, prepared, raised for alliances like this. The board called it inevitable. Investors called it strategic. She called it destiny. He didn't move. Inside, nothing shifted. No excitement, no resistance, just a still, quiet void. "You're silent," she observed. "I'm calculating." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "This isn't a transaction." For him, everything was. His fingers moved slowly to his neck, to the scar he rarely acknowledged. For a second, something unfamiliar flickered in his expression. Not doubt, something more dangerous. Charlotte noticed. She always noticed. "You'll give them the answer tonight," she said. It wasn't a question. She turned and left the office with the same controlled grace she entered. Adrian stayed where he was. The city below him felt mapped, predictable, obedient. But for the first time, the outcome didn't feel inevitable. The conference room was full. Executives, analysts, silence. Adrian entered last. He expected numbers, agreement, efficiency. He did not expect resistance. "We are overestimating the market capacity." The voice was calm, clear. He lifted his gaze. At the far end of the table sat a young analyst. Blonde hair, composed posture, direct eyes. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't defensive. She was certain. "Your name?" he asked evenly. "Eva Morgan." The name settled somewhere deeper than it should have. "And you believe the board is wrong?" "I believe we are ignoring variables that could cost us millions." A subtle shift moved through the room. No one openly challenged Adrian Hale. Not like this. He studied her. There was no fear in her expression, no attempt to impress him, only conviction. Something tightened in his chest. A flicker, a memory without shape. Cold air, stone steps, warm fingers brushing his. He pushed the thought away. "Prepare an alternative model," he said. His tone was controlled, but inside, something had shifted. For the first time in years, he wanted someone to keep arguing. When the meeting ended, she gathered her papers calmly. No triumph, no hesitation, just focus. He watched her leave, and the strange feeling remained. Not curiosity, not attraction, recognition. He just didn't know from where. The elevator doors closed. Silence settled between them. The city lights blurred behind the glass as the numbers began to descend. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Adrian stood slightly turned toward her. Eva looked straight ahead, composed, controlled. "You're not afraid," he said quietly. She glanced at him. "Of what?" "Of challenging me." A faint curve touched her lips. If a decision is weak, it deserves to be tested. There was no sarcasm in her voice, no defiance, only logic, only certainty. He studied her profile, the line of her jaw, the calm in her expression. And again, that unfamiliar pull. Not attraction, not yet. Something older, a memory pressing against the surface. Cold stone beneath him, the smell of rain, warm fingers brushing his. He inhaled slowly. "You're confident," he said. "I prepare," she replied. The elevator slowed. For the first time in years, Adrian Hale felt something he could not immediately categorize. Not risk, not strategy, unpredictability. The doors opened. Eva stepped out first. She did not look back. He remained inside a second longer, watching. And for the first time, he wasn't certain what his next move should be. Adrian Hale did not lose focus. Ever. But tonight he caught himself reading the same paragraph 3 times. And it wasn't the numbers. He stared at the projections, the clean lines of risk analysis, the predictable curves of growth. Everything made sense. Everything was controlled. Except the distraction. He called her in, not because he needed clarification, because he needed certainty. Eva entered quietly, composed, unapologetic, calm. "You wanted to discuss the model?" she said. He nodded, but remained standing. "Why are you so confident the market is overheated?" "Because we're ignoring behavioral volatility," she replied without hesitation. "And you believe my assessment is flawed?" The question came out sharper than intended. She lifted her gaze to meet his. "I don't work with belief. I work with data." Silence expanded between them. He felt it then. Irritation. Not toward her, toward himself. She wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't trying to challenge his authority. She was simply right, and that unsettled him more than open defiance ever could. He stepped closer to the desk, fingers pressing against the wood as if grounding himself. "Confidence can be dangerous," he said evenly. "So can arrogance," she replied just as calmly. The air shifted. He studied her, not the report, not the charts, her posture, her steadiness, the way she didn't retreat under pressure. Something inside him tightened, a flicker of recognition without memory. He pushed it down. This discussion isn't personal, she held his gaze. It never is for me. And for the first time in years, Adrian Hale felt the faintest crack in his control. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked unexpectedly. He froze. "Like what?" "Like you're trying to remember me." The air grew heavier. Something inside him tightened sharply. Stairs, autumn wind, a small hand, bread. He stepped back. "It's professional interest." She didn't look away. "No." A pause. "It's something else." And for the first time, Adrian had no answer. Late that evening, they were alone in the office. The city glowed beyond the glass. She leaned over the desk, explaining the calculation. Her hand brushed his fingers. Accidentally. But in that moment, time stopped. Warmth. The same. The same as then. He pulled his hand away. Too sharply. She noticed. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." His voice came out rough. He turned away. Because if he had looked at her for one more second, everything might have aligned. That same evening, Charlotte walked into his office, without warning. "You're spending too much time with her." "It's a project." "No." Her voice turned colder. "It's a risk." He turned to face her. "Do you doubt me?" "I doubt variables." She stepped closer. "And I don't like it when emotions interfere with strategy." The words sounded like a warning. The envelope had no logo, no return address, no signature. Just his name, printed neatly. Adrian opened it without hesitation. He was used to pressure, used to threats disguised as negotiation. But this was different. Inside was a copy of a police report. Date, 17 years ago. Case, child abduction. Location, Chicago. Age, 3 years old. He skimmed it at first, until he saw the name, Adrian Hale. His fingers tightened around the paper. He read it again, then again, and only then did he notice the line beneath it. Distinguishing mark, surgical scar below the left collarbone. The room went silent. He didn't move. Slowly, almost unconsciously, he touched his neck. The scar. A thin, pale line he had never questioned. He had never asked where it came from. He didn't believe in the past. He believed in results, in numbers, in structure, in control. At the bottom of the report was a short note. "If you are who we believe you are, an independent DNA test is required. James Carter, private investigator." Adrian leaned back in his chair. He didn't feel fear. He felt irritation. This was an attempt at manipulation, a strategy, someone trying to destabilize him. But something in his chest tightened, not because of the accusation, because of the possibility. 17 years. That was how long they had waited. The call came in the late evening. William answered it himself. Margaret stood across the room at first. She didn't want to hope. Not again. William listened in silence. No interruptions, no questions. Just the sound of a man who had learned how to contain everything. Then the detective said it. 99.98%. William closed his eyes. Margaret saw his hand tightened around the phone. For a moment she couldn't breathe. 17 years of searching, DNA samples, false leads, names that almost matched, boys who weren't him, hope that kept breaking and rebuilding itself. "It's him," the detective continued. Margaret stepped closer. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. William lowered the phone slowly. He didn't look at her right away. He just nodded. Once. Margaret covered her mouth, not to cry, to stop herself from collapsing. "He's alive?" she whispered. William's voice was rough when he answered. "Yes." And in that single word, their entire world shifted. For 17 years they had lived in the shadow of a disappearance. Now they stood on the edge of something even more terrifying. What if he didn't remember them? What if he didn't want them? William looked toward the dark window, toward the lake. "He built a life," he said quietly. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "So did we," she replied, "but not the one we were supposed to." The results arrived at dawn. Encrypted, clinical, emotionless. Adrian opened the file without preparation, without expectation. He had read thousands of reports in his life, financial forecasts, risk assessments, legal briefings. This was just another document, until it wasn't. Match 99.98%. Father, William Hale. Mother, Margaret Hale. He read the line once, then again, then a third time, slower. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. He closed the laptop, and only then did he feel it. Not fear, not panic, something deeper, something breaking. Not his career, not his status, not his control. His identity. Adrian Hale. He had believed the name was constructed, earned, built through discipline and ambition. It turned out he had been born with it. A memory flickered. A staircase, bright light, strange hands, darkness. He stood up abruptly, his breath unsteady. For the first time in years, he did not know who he was. Not a strategist, not a deputy CEO, not a future son-in-law in a corporate alliance. A child, taken, lost, found, and still not whole. Adrian stood in front of the mirror. He stared at his reflection for a long time, as if the man looking back at him might answer. The face was familiar. Sharp jawline, controlled expression, the composure of someone who never loses. But something had shifted, a crack beneath the surface. He placed his palm against the cold marble counter, leaned closer, studied his own eyes. For years he had known exactly who he was, a strategist, a leader, a man who built his future step by step. Now that certainty felt borrowed, fragile. He exhaled slowly, and for the first time in his life, he asked out loud, "Who are you?" The silence did not answer. The phone rang, sharp, unexpected. He looked at the screen. One name, Eva. His fingers tightened around the device. The past had found him, and the present was calling. The morning was far too bright for what was happening inside him. Adrian sat in his car outside the Hale residence, hands resting evenly on the steering wheel, steady, controlled, disciplined. But in his chest, it felt as if he were holding something far more fragile than leather and steel, as if he were gripping his own heart to keep it from breaking through. On his phone screen, the message still glowed. "We're here. We're waiting. Please, just come." He had never been accustomed to the word please addressed to him, not in business, not in strategy, not in power. He turned the screen off and stared ahead. For 17 years he had built himself as if he had no past, and now the past had not disappeared, it had simply waited. The door opened almost immediately when he stepped inside, and the first thing he saw was her eyes, not appraising, not formal, not cautious. There was something raw in them, something that almost felt physical. "Adrian," her voice trembled, "you're really here." He didn't answer, because any word would have sounded untrue. She stepped closer, slowly, carefully, as if afraid reality might vanish if she moved too quickly. Then she paused, remembering he was no longer a child. "May I?" she asked softly. In that single question, there was fear, restraint, reverence. He didn't know what to say, but he didn't move away. Her fingers touched his neck, lightly, gently, right where the thin line of scar tissue rested, the mark he had always treated as incidental. She closed her eyes. "It's him," she whispered. "It's our boy." Something shifted inside him, not shattered, just changed its sound. He had spent his entire life fearing weakness, but this did not feel like weakness. It felt like truth. "If you are my parents," his voice remained even, though something beneath it trembled, "why don't I remember?" His father stepped forward then, composed, steady. "Because you were taken," he said quietly, "and because we searched for you every day." There was no theatrics in his tone, no performance, only something that could not be faked. "We didn't save you then," he continued, "but we never stopped looking." He did not sit. Adrian remained standing in the middle of the study, the framed photograph still in his hands. The fire behind him cracked softly, but the warmth no longer reached him. William Hale watched him carefully, restraint carved into every line of his face. Margaret stood opposite, composed, yet her fingers trembled ever so slightly against the edge of the desk. "You built your entire life without us," William said at last. His voice was low, steady. "And we respected that. We didn't interfere. We waited." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Waiting doesn't change what happened," he replied. 30 years don't disappear because you say you searched." Silence settled between them, heavy, but not hostile. Margaret stepped closer, not touching him this time, just close enough for him to see the fear in her eyes. "We searched every day," she said quietly. "We never stopped." Adrian lowered his gaze to the photograph. The boy in the frame was smiling, unaware of the life that would follow. "I don't know how to be your son," he admitted. The confession was barely above a whisper. William inhaled slowly. "You don't have to decide that tonight." Outside, the wind brushed against the tall windows of the mansion. Inside, the past stood between them, not as accusation, but as something fragile, unfinished. For the first time, Adrian did not walk away. By the time Adrian returned to the office, the city was already sinking into night. The lights of Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, cold and distant. Inside, the floor was almost empty. Only one office remained illuminated, Eva's. She stood near the window when he entered, her back straight, her long blonde hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She did not turn immediately, as if she had sensed him before hearing the door. "You're still here?" he said quietly. "I had work to finish." It was a simple answer, too simple. He stepped closer, but not too close. The distance between them felt deliberate, fragile. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was different from the one in the Hale mansion. That silence had been heavy with the past. This one carried something unspoken about the future. "I met them today," Adrian finally said. Eva turned then. Her eyes searched his face, not for information, but for truth. "And?" He exhaled slowly. "They want me to belong." "And you?" The question was gentle, not demanding. He looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not as his employee, not as an ally in corporate tension, but as the one person who had stood beside him without knowing who he truly was. "I don't know where I belong," he admitted, "but I know where I feel understood." The air shifted between them. Eva didn't move. She didn't reach for him. She simply held his gaze. And for the first time since learning the truth about his name, Adrian felt something steady beneath his feet. Not certainty, but direction. They did not speak for a long time. The city stretched beneath them in a sea of lights, restless, indifferent, powerful. The world was still moving, still demanding, still calculating. But inside the office, everything had slowed. Adrian sat on the edge of the desk, his hands loosely clasped, his thoughts no longer racing. Eva remained beside him, close enough for their shoulders to almost touch. Not touching, just present. He had spent the entire day confronting his past, a name, a family, a history that had been stolen and returned all at once. Yet it was here, in this quiet moment, that the weight began to settle into something steadier. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," he said at last. Eva turned slightly toward him. "You don't have to decide everything tonight." Her voice wasn't trying to convince him, it wasn't asking for promises, it was simply there, solid. He looked at her, truly looked, not as a colleague, not as a complication, but as the one constant that had not shifted when everything else had. For the first time, choosing did not feel like surrender, it felt like clarity. Outside, the skyline shimmered. Inside, Adrian Hale made his first decision not out of obligation, not out of pressure, but out of something far more dangerous and far more honest. He chose himself. And when he did not
After
step
his
away
refusal,
from her.
everything changed quickly, too quickly. The board was furious, the shareholders were cautious, the press was already looking for explanations as to why the strategically perfect alliance had suddenly been frozen. Richard Morgan did not raise his voice. He simply looked at Adrian longer than usual. "Do you understand the consequences this will bring?" he asked coldly. "Yes. And you are still going against the structure?" "I am the structure," Adrian replied calmly, "and I will no longer be part of a deal." Silence settled in the room. Not an explosion, not a scandal, a cold understanding that a new phase had begun. But the hardest part was not here. The hardest part was waiting for him that evening. Eva did not avoid him, but a distance had appeared between them. Not coldness, not estrangement, an awareness of the scale. He entered her office without knocking for the first time. She was standing by the window. The light was already fading. The city was slowly slipping into night. "You know this won't end simply," she said without turning. "I know. This isn't about the engagement. It's about power, about legacy, about war." He stepped closer. "I can handle it." She turned sharply. "It's not about you." Emotion appeared in her voice for the first time. "It's about the fact that now you are the center of confrontation. Hale, Morgan, the board, the press, all of it will press down." A pause. "And me?" she asked quietly. "Where am I in all of this?" He froze. "Beside me." "That's not an answer." She stepped closer. "I knew a boy who didn't belong to a structure or a surname. He was just alive. He looked at the world as if every day were a chance." Her voice softened. "And now you're turning back into a strategy." Those words struck him. He took off his jacket, threw it onto the chair. He unbuttoned the top button of his shirt as if it had become hard to breathe. And then she saw it. A scar. Beneath his left collarbone, a thin, curved line. She did not immediately understand what had stopped her, but her breathing changed. Memory does not always return through words. Sometimes it returns through the body. Stairs. Cold concrete. A rusty metal edge. He had slipped that day. Fell. Blood on his collar. She had been crying, holding his hand, shouting for someone to help. And the scar. Exactly like this. Not straight, not neat, with a slight curve at the bottom. Her fingers trembled. Where, she stepped closer, where did you get this scar? He frowned. I don't know. I've had it since childhood. The silence became almost ringing. She slowly lifted her gaze. She was not looking at a deputy CEO, not at an heir, at a boy. You fell, she whispered. He didn't understand. What? On the stairs, near the subway. You were laughing because you didn't want me to cry. His heart struck sharply. The air seemed to thicken. You were holding my hand, he breathed. She closed her eyes. I brought you bread, almost every day. A pause. He looked at her as if the world had shifted. It was you? The words were not loud. They landed like an udar. Her eyes filled with tears, not hysteria, not weakness, release. I looked for you afterward, she said quietly. You disappeared. He stepped forward. They took me. She nodded, and in that nod there were years. I thought, her voice trembled, I thought you didn't survive. He reached out his hand, this time not cautiously. His fingers touched her cheek. I survived. Her breathing became uneven. And became who you became? No, he shook his head. I became who I had to be. A pause. And beside you, I remember who I was.
He stepped closer. He held her, not like a man who conquers, but like someone who has come home. The kiss was not passion, it was memory. Two adults who suddenly found their starting point in the past. When they pulled away, her palm rested against his chest. So you were here all this time, she whispered. So I was never completely lost, he answered. He pressed his forehead gently to hers. Now you understand why I can't live by someone else's plan. She nodded. Because you already once lost a life you didn't choose. He smiled, for the first time without tension. And I won't let that happen again. For the first time, their connection was no longer tension, no longer gravity. It was history, shared. When they left the office together, the world was still complicated. Last names still existed. Boards of directors still existed. But between them, there was no longer uncertainty. He was no longer just the heir. She was no longer just the analyst. They were two children from a cold staircase who grew up and found each other again. And now it was not an accident. It was a choice. The morning did not begin with the news. Not with the market. Not with numbers. Not with calls from the board. The morning began with silence. Adrian stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking at the city that had not yet switched on its rush. The sky was gray and clean, as if reality itself had decided to give him a few minutes without pressure. He held a cup of coffee but did not drink, because inside him last night was still echoing. Eva, her palm on his chest, her breathing close like a promise, and his own voice, which for the first time in many years did not sound like an order. It sounded like a confession.
I choose. He did not know how long he stood there before his phone vibrated. One message from Richard Morgan. Short, cold. 10 o'clock, bored, no delays. Adrian allowed himself a faint smile. He had no intention of being late, but for the first time in his life, he was going to walk into that room not as part of the system, but as a man who no longer belonged to someone else's plan. The boardroom looked exactly the way he had seen it hundreds of times. Glass, light, strict faces, sharp suits, measured voices, and in the air that particular silence that appears when people know power is about to be decided. Charlotte sat closer to Richard. No emotion, composed, impeccable, as always. But Adrian saw what others did not. Her fingers were clasped just a little tighter than usual. She understood, too. The script was no longer under control. When he entered, the conversation stopped. That silence was familiar. Before, it meant he controls. Today, it meant something else. They expect him to give in. Richard did not waste time. "We will not discuss personal matters," he said. "We will discuss consequences." Adrian sat down, calmly, not demonstratively, just sat. "You disrupted the announcement. You disrupted the strategy. You put us in a vulnerable position," Richard continued. "Investors are nervous." "Investors will survive," Adrian answered evenly. Someone at the far end of the table inhaled sharply. Someone gripped a pen tighter. Richard tilted his head slightly. "You do realize this is war?" Adrian looked at him directly. "I do. I simply no longer participate in wars I did not choose." His voice was not loud, but it made the room colder. "You think you can just walk away?" one of the directors asked. "I think I can choose," Adrian replied. Charlotte lifted her gaze, exactly at that moment. "Only those who have something to lose get to choose," Charlotte said calmly, "and you are losing everything." Adrian paused. "No, Charlotte, for the first time, I'm no longer losing." It was not an insult. It was a fact. Richard leaned forward on his elbows. "What do you want?" There it was, the question at the core of every negotiation. What do you want? Adrian inhaled and suddenly realized, for the first time in his life, he truly knew the answer. "I resign as Deputy CEO of Morgan Industries," he said. Silence struck the room. Someone even let out a nervous, disbelieving laugh. Richard froze. "You can't," Adrian interrupted calmly. "I can, and I will, today." Charlotte did not move. Only her eyes darkened. "Because of her?" she asked quietly. Adrian did not look at her. "Because of myself." Those words were more final than any ultimatum. He stood. "And one more thing." Richard narrowed his eyes. Adrian placed a thin folder on the table. Hale Industries. A few faces flinched. The name sounded like a blow that could not be ignored. "I know you've been competing with them for years, and I know you planned to use me as an instrument against them, whether I knew the truth or not." Richard remained silent. There was nothing to deny. "Now I know who I am, and I will not allow my name to be used by you or by them." He looked at everyone at once. "I am not your asset, and I am not theirs. I am a person." He turned and walked towards the door. And only when his hand was already on the handle did Richard speak. "You think Hale will accept you as an heir?" Adrian stopped. Did not turn immediately. 1 second. 2. "I'm not going to them for a role," he said. "I'm going for the truth." And he walked out.
Eva wasn't waiting in the office, and not in a cafe. She was waiting where it was always easier to tell the truth. Outside, on the street, among ordinary people. She stood in her light coat, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Her gaze was calm, but beneath it, worry hid quietly. He saw her and felt something unexpected, as if everything else, the board, the names, the pressure, had remained behind the glass above. And here, on the street, there was only breath and choice. He stepped closer. She didn't ask, "How did it go?" She simply said, "You look pale." There was more care in that sentence than in any speech. "I did it," he answered quietly. Eva raised her brows slightly. "What exactly?" He looked at her as if afraid that if he said it out loud, the world would try to take it back. "I left." Silence. She didn't smile immediately. First, something sharp flickered in her eyes. Fear, not for herself, for him. "Adrian," she said carefully, "you understand they won't just let you go." He nodded. "Let them try." She stepped closer. "And you?" He looked at her and for the first time said it the way he should have long ago. "I'm not living in a cage anymore, even if the cage is golden." Eva slowly exhaled. Her gaze softened. "Then where are you going?" He didn't answer immediately. For the first time in his life, he wasn't speaking about strategy. He was speaking about life. "Home," he said, and then, almost surprised at himself, added, "To my parents." Eva flinched almost imperceptibly. "Are you ready?" "No," he answered honestly, "but readiness is a luxury, and all we have is reality." He extended his hand, not demanding, simply offering. Eva looked at his palm for several seconds, then she placed hers into it. Their fingers closed naturally, as if in this world it had always been meant to be this way. "Then let's go," she said softly. And it wasn't about the road. It was about the choice. The house by Lake Michigan greeted them with silence. Trees, water, light resting softly on the windows without pressure. Margaret stepped outside first. She didn't rush. She didn't make a sudden movement. She simply stopped at the porch and looked at Adrian as if afraid he would disappear if she blinked. William stood slightly behind her, restrained, steady. But his eyes betrayed what he was trying to hold back, the tension of a man who had spent his whole life holding on and now could no longer do so. Adrian took a step forward, and once again felt what was most frightening, not control, but vulnerability. He stopped, as if unsure where to place himself in this space. Margaret broke the silence first. "You came," she said quietly. Adrian nodded. "Yes." And suddenly he realized he didn't know how to address these people. He could say Mrs. Hale. He could say Margaret. He could say anything. But there was a word pressing inside him, a word that hurt to even think. Margaret seemed to sense it. She stepped closer. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "Just be here." And it felt like rescue. William approached them. He looked at Eva calmly, attentively. "You," Adrian began. William gently raised his hand, stopping him. "We'll learn everything gradually," he said. "First, you." Adrian swallowed. "I left Morgan," he said. Margaret didn't ask why. She simply closed her eyes for a second, as if her heart had been waiting for exactly that. William nodded. "So you chose yourself." "I don't know what I chose," Adrian admitted, "but I know what I'm no longer choosing." He looked at them. "I don't want to live as a tool anymore."
The silence stretched long. Then Margaret spoke softly. "Thank you." One word, but it sounded as if she was thanking him not for a decision, but for surviving and coming back. That night, he stepped outside. The lake was black, still, cold. Eva followed him. She didn't ask. She simply stood beside him. "You're shaking," she said quietly. "It's not from the cold," he replied. He kept looking at the water. "I keep thinking, if back then—" Eva didn't interrupt. "If I hadn't disappeared," Adrian continued, "if I hadn't been taken, I would have been different." Eva stepped closer. "You would have been a boy who had the chance to grow up in warmth," she said softly. "But you would still have been you." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "What if there's already too much construction inside me?" Eva raised her hand and touched his scar, not studying it, not as proof, but as a touch to his life. "Then we'll take that construction apart layer by layer," she said, "until only you remain." Adrian looked at her and suddenly understood that he didn't want to hesitate anymore. He didn't want almost. He didn't want silence out of fear of breaking something. He had already broken the most important thing, someone else's plan. Now it was time to build his own. "I want you with me," he said quietly. Eva didn't smile at once. Her eyes darkened with emotion. "I already am, but I need to understand. You're choosing me as—" He didn't let her finish. He took her hands in his. "I choose you as life." It wasn't poetic. It was true. Eva exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for too long. For the first time, she didn't argue. She simply pressed her forehead to his. "Then don't let go," she whispered. "I won't," he answered. And he kissed her, not out of passion, but out of return. The morning was simple. No press, no cameras, no guests, just them. Margaret placed a small bouquet on the table, white flowers, delicate, without ceremony. William stood by the window, reserved, but in his eyes there was something Adrian had never seen in the men of the business world. Quiet pride, not for status, for his son. Margaret stepped toward Adrian and adjusted the collar of his shirt. An ordinary gesture, maternal. And suddenly, his eyes stung. He turned away so no one would notice, but Eva noticed. She squeezed his hand a little tighter, and in that was everything. Support, love, silence. They walked toward the lake. The wind was cool. The water was calm. The world felt strangely still, as if even nature had decided not to interfere. Margaret said a few words, simple, warm. That love is not an accident, it is a choice. That home is not walls, it is people. William did not speak long. He simply looked at Adrian and said, "We found you, and we will never let you go again, not as property, as family." Adrian nodded. He couldn't speak, because his throat was full of everything he had never allowed himself to feel. Eva turned toward him, and in her eyes there was something that cannot be calculated, only lived. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Adrian smiled, without fear. "No." And then he added, "But I want to be." Eva smiled through tears. "That's enough." He slid the ring onto her finger. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, from happiness that is frightening to hold because it is too real. She placed the ring on his hand, and her fingers lingered against his skin, as if she needed to be sure this was real, that he was here, that he would not disappear again. Adrian leaned closer and whispered into her ear, I will never get lost again. Eva closed her eyes. I will never let you go again, she answered. And it was not a promise. It was a decision. Later, back inside the house, Adrian's phone lay on the table. He did not touch it, did not check the news, did not open his email, because for the first time, his life did not belong to a screen. It belonged to the breath beside him. Margaret wrapped her arms around him from behind. They'll start applying pressure, she said quietly. Adrian covered her hands with his own. Let them. Aren't you afraid? He turned to her. I am, he said honestly. But now, I'm not afraid of losing power. I'm afraid of losing myself. Eva looked at him carefully. Then hold on to what matters. He nodded. To you. She smiled. To us. Adrian looked out the window. The lake shimmered in the light. Quiet. Free. And suddenly he understood. He truly had been lost, but not forever. Because fate can take your name. It can steal your childhood. It can force you to live someone else's life. But it cannot permanently erase what was yours from the beginning. Your truth, your love, your choice. And now he had everything no deal in the world could buy. A home, a name, and a woman who remembered him long before the surnames. He took Eva's hand and said softly, Let's go. Where? She asked. Adrian smiled. Into life.